Hey you guys, so my name is Tanisha, but you can just call me Nisha, and I am going to do my mini review on the movie Poor Things. Now, if you have not watched it or you did not go to the movies to see it, you can watch it over on Hulu. That's where I watched it if you have a subscription. As always, I am going to give you a brief synopsis of what the movie is about, and then I will give you my personal opinion, perspective, and my takeaways of the movie. Shall we go ahead and get into it? Before I get into the synopsis, I do want to say that this movie was nominated for like 11 different categories for the Oscar, and they won 4, including Best Actress. So Emma Stone won Best Actress for leading role, and then I think they won Best Costume Design. Let's check. Emma Stone won Best Actress in a leading role, Best Production Design, Best Costume Design, and Best Makeup and Hairstyling. Go ahead and get into a synopsis. So the movie is about the scientist. His name is Dr. Godwin, and he finds this woman who has washed ashore. She has drowned and unalived herself, and she was also pregnant at the time. It looked like she was pretty far along in her pregnancy. He takes this woman's body, brings it back to his home, performs some type of mad scientist experiment on her, and brings her to life. He then names her and calls her Bella Baxter, and then he has her address him as God. And from there, you have this story of this woman who is brought back to life, and she has to learn the understanding and meaning of what this world is all about through a new experience of a second chance. Dr. Godwin hires this man named Max to come in and be his assistant, but also Bella's mentor, studier. He researches her, he studies her behaviors, he monitors her, and he also helps her. They are getting to know one another. Dr. Godwin tells Max that he believes that Max should propose to Bella. Now, this doesn't seem too far-fetched, but I'll get into why this was complicated to me, and it kind of was like, He does. Max says that he has feelings for Bella, and he goes on to ask Bella for her hand in marriage, and she's like, okay, because what does she know about marriage? Now, she's very sheltered. They don't take her to a lot of places, and so she does demand often to go outside. She does demand often that she wants to see the world, and they kind of deny her those requests because they still feel that she is kind of childish, I should say. She meets this man named Duncan, and Duncan kind of seduces her into this idea that he will take her and show her the world. And so she goes to Dr. Godwin and says, look, I'm leaving. And he's like, wait, but you're about to get married. And she's like, I don't care. And she was like, I want to see the world, and Duncan is going to take me. I'm going to go have my fun with Duncan, and then I'll come back and I'll marry Max like you want me to. And this is where I'm gonna go ahead and stop the story so that I can get into my personal takeaways of this movie. Let's first start with Emma Stone and why she definitely should have won Best Actress. She did a really good job of playing this woman who has no understanding of life and has to be taught through experience and situations what life is all about, from being a woman to also just being a person who is a part of society and the larger problems that are at hand. So she did a great job of that. I also really liked how this movie visually looked. It was almost kind of like if the pages of a storybook were coming off the page and turning into something out of your imagination, or like you were looking into a world through a lens. They kept doing like this little circle lens where it felt like you were kind of like peeping into something and looking into it. The movie itself was peculiar. This is when she goes back and she asks God, Dr. Godwin, what happened to me and who am I and did I have a child? And he tells her the story of how he found her and how he brought her back to life by taking the brain of her child and inserting it into her brain space and bringing her back to life this way. Now, the reason that this kind of is weird to me is because they make a choice in the movie to make Bella very sexual explorative, and so she finds out very early on that she can self-please herself, which she does at the dinner table, she does in her room, and then because she likes the feeling of it so much, it makes it seem like she becomes like a nympho for this, like she has these urges all the time and she wants to do it all the time. I found that interesting because she's also a woman with a child's brain. So to make that be the focus of what she likes to do, like she didn't like to play, she didn't like art, she was more focused on self-pleasure, and I found that to be a little weird. I also found that to be weird because the men in her life are having conversations about what she should be doing based on their feelings about her. And so there's this conversation between God and Max, and Dr. Godwin comes to Max and says, hey, I think you should marry Bella. Max says, oh, you don't want her for yourself? I thought you created her to groom her to be yours. And he was like, what? No. And he defines what his condition is, but whatever his condition is, he's unable to have sex. So he basically was like, no, I can't. Like if I ever tried that, I would die. And I think more of her now, even though I considered that, I think more of her now from a parental standpoint. And Max is like, oh, okay. Now again, these two grown men who have full frontal understanding are talking about a woman who has the brain of maybe a tween at that, if she's developed to that stage. The part of the movie that gets a little too oversaturated in visuality is when Bella leaves with Duncan, and he as he promised, he takes her all over the world. He shows her different things. He gets upset with her when he finds out that she has bedded another man, and Bella's understanding of right and wrong prostitution, all of those things don't exist in her mind. She just knows that she likes the way certain things feel, and if somebody comes to her and they're interested and she's interested, she will do it. So when Duncan finds out that she has bedded another man, is very upset about that. He wants to punish her a little bit. He puts her in a box and he takes her on a ship to isolate her from the world so that she can't meet as many people. A man named Harry. Now Harry is this suave, debonair type of dude who actually shows Bella what the world is really like. He's introduced as a cynist, but in my personal opinion, I believe that all cynists used to be people who were optimistic, people who had really bright and hopeful expectations for the world, and through either experiences or observation or witnessing of things, experiences begin to erode their belief in humanity, and they become more cynical about people. So I took some notes, and I want really quickly, before I go too far off into the deep end, my perspectives of what I felt like the movie was trying to convey, or at least what I received from the movie. So one of the things that I brought up was that Duncan professed his love for Bella. He fell in love with Bella, even though he thought initially that he would toy with Bella, use her for a good time, and then discard of her. But because Bella doesn't have the emotional range, and it almost feels like she doesn't have a soul, it almost feels like she doesn't have a soul, which I take conflict with, because I feel like children, if this is the brain of a child, she's naturally and inherently good, and she does have a soul. And so the fact that they limited her emotional range to make it seem as though because she is childlike, she doesn't feel emotion, I thought that was kind of weird. I don't know if they were trying to play more to the fact that she wasn't fully human anymore because she was brought back to life. I'm not really sure where they were going with that, but that kind of was one of those things that puzzled me. Anyways, Duncan professed his love to Bella, and she was just kind of like, okay. And she was like, but I'm going back to marry Max. I have to go back and marry Max. You already knew this. And he was like, forget Max. She doesn't really feel the emotion for anybody. She will go on to develop that. So the fact that Duncan is not able to control Bella and make her fall in love with him, that bothers him, which makes him become more obsessive and more controlling and more manipulative, which is why he tries to isolate her by taking her in a box on a ship to prevent her from meeting other, especially men, but people in general. So as she's on the ship and she meets the older woman with the hair, I forget her character's name, I'll put it down here, and she meets Harry, they are also sharpening her knowledge and exposing her to things that she didn't know about. When they set on land, Harry takes Bella and shows her how the world really is, how the world can be oppressive, how the world can mistreat people, how, circumstances and situations will make the bad come out in people, or sometimes people who sit higher than others will not care about the conditions that is happening to other people around them. And so she goes into this whole spell of just sadness, and she's crying and just an emotional wreck because she's never seen this before, because she was sheltered. And so since she lived a sheltered, privileged life, she didn't have to know that these type of things were happening. So she steals all of Duncan's money and she gives it to the men who work on the ship and says, give it to the poor need this will help them. They steal the money. I thought it was interesting that all the men have some sort of affection for Bella. Max has affection for Bella. Dr. Godwin has affection for Bella. Duncan ends up having affection for Bella. And so it kind of turns into this concept, in my personal opinion, that when men have affection for a woman, she stands a better chance of being treated and respected better. Not always, but usually, if a man has affection for a woman, this will cause him to treat her differently. And Bella learns while she's out there living in the world that men who don't have any affection for you and don't care about you tend to treat you with disregard. They care nothing about what's happening to you. They care nothing about your experience with them. All they care about is what they've gotten out of it and that they were able to use you to their benefit. When she basically gives Duncan's money away, he gets so upset that she lost his money. She doesn't love him, that he acts out, lashes against her, and he leaves her. He takes the money that she does have that Dr. Godwin gave her for, just an emergency fund. He takes that money and he leaves her. And so she just walks right on into a brothel and says, hey, I need to make some money. So through her experience of becoming a sex worker or lady of the evening, she starts to realize that this is something that is emotionally connected as well. The idea of pleasure also is mental. And so through this experience of having just any old thing on top of her or behind her, and them just grunting and they smell, and some of them, she starts to understand that there is something more important in the intimacy of being sexual with a person. It's not just about, feeling something physically, but also connecting with someone emotionally and mentally. He meets Toinette, who is also a sex worker, and Toinette is this beautiful Black woman who, kind of takes Bella under her wing and kind of shows her the ropes, helps her find a way to procure the smell that she's smelling from some of these stinky men who are just coming in there to do what they do. And she then becomes intimate with Toinette. There's this scene where Toinette looks at Bella's stomach and she says, oh, you have a child? And she says, no, I don't have any children. And she says, you don't have to lie about it. And she was like, no, I don't have any children. And she said, yes, you do. And so this is when she realizes that she must have had a child, because Toinette would not lie to her. And I noticed that in this movie, the very two genuine people who didn't really want anything from Bella, but were probably the most honest with her, was Harry and Toinette. They meant well for her. Even Harry said, I didn't know that you would be this affected by this. I'm sorry, I wasn't was a little jealous to see how well you were living and how you just had no concept of things that are going on around you. And I wanted to rip, the Band-Aid off and just show you exactly what exists in this world. And so I thought it was very interesting that usually when people have these soulless moments, that they learn to have more heart and compassion and soul and empathy through their experiences and encounters with Black people. One of the things that I felt like this movie pointed out is that women are in safer regard with men when they will exchange their freedom, their free will to the submission of that man. So if a man has affection for a woman and she is willing to offer him in exchange for his affection, her surrender in freedoms, then that will make for a more unified relationship. From Dr. Godwin to Duncan, men expected Bella to do as she was told. And when she would not submit to that, that would cause her sometimes to be at odds with this man who was like, because I am offering you my affection, then I expect you to submit to what I tell you to do. And then when Bella goes out into the world and she realizes that she doesn't have the affection and safekeeping of Dr. Godwin or Max, and now she is at the whim of any man who wants to be with her. One of the things that I didn't touch on that I want to mention really quick is that when Bella and when Duncan finds out that Bella has had relations with other men, he continuously calls her a whore. And he says it with such conviction that it is almost a reflection of himself and a projection of himself, because he understands in that moment it feels like to be used and not to be cared about in the way that men usually don't care about women. The use of prostitution or calling a woman a whore and making her seem like she's less valuable because she has experienced sex outside of him is almost why men are angry with themselves for creating prostitution in the first place. There would never be whores if men didn't do whorish things, if men didn't have desirable impulses that required women to submit to them in that way in exchange for money or safety or, bills to be paid or whatever, then there would be no need for this. But the fact that it exists means that there are men who did not control themselves and created the circumstance and element for prostitution to be real. And when Duncan is referring to Bella as a whore, it's almost like he's looking at himself in the mirror and is upset about how these circumstances have now caused him pain and heartbreak. Overall, I thought that this movie was okay. I was a little conflicted about the idea of putting an adolescent's brain into a fully functioning woman and then having all of these conversations about how it's okay to exploit her. Also making the focus of her enjoyment being sex. I didn't like that either. So I would say that this movie was okay. Visually, I loved watching it except for the redundancy of repeated sex scenes. But I thought that the way the movie looked was really cool. I would give this movie a 6 out of 10. I felt like it was a little bit too long to get to the point. If you watched it, want to add to the conversation, go ahead and drop that down in the comments. And always please like, share, and subscribe, and let's be friends. Okay, bye y'all.